Wars graphics has had to be used just for, like, every fucking commercial now. It's amazing. And, like, and these aren't just, like, oh, like, we'll just throw, like, a Star Wars logo on. They're, like, these grandiose cinematic things where, like, they're going through AT-ATs, and on the Death Star, I'm like, who's making these? How much are they getting paid?
Based on what I've heard about visual effects houses, not enough.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm just, like, amazed. But, like, these guys are making movies that aren't movies.
Yeah.
And, like, that is just something, like, I could not stop thinking about. Even though, like, I honestly don't think I expect anything from The Last Jedi. Other than, like, I don't think that, actually.
You don't think it'll be bad?
I don't think it'll be, like, I mean, for all we can say, I think, like, it'll be a slightly more fulfilling Force Awakens.
That's about the best I can hope for.
I think what it's going to be is, like, Rian Johnson is going to slide in, like, an interesting question here and there, but it's mostly going to be the same sort of, like, bland corporate fare with a bunch of visual stank put on it.
I think I've come to accept that we will never get a truly transcendent Star Wars movie ever again.
Yeah, well, like, I'm curious, like, how, if, like, these, like, giant, like, corporate manicured projects can ever be transcendent, unless they're, like, directed by George Miller.
Right.
So, like, I think the best we can hope for is that, like, they don't collapse under their own weight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, I really, if you, like, sold the Mad Max franchise to Disney...
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't...
I don't think we would ever get something as transcendent as Fury Road.
Yeah, because, like, that's the name I was like, movies by committee can only be so good.
Right. Well, just to close out the Star Wars discussion, I do think there is a difference between, like, I mean, all films are movies by committee to some degree, but there is a difference between that and the kind of corporate filmmaking we're talking about. And
when I say, like, filmmaking by committee, I mean, like, literal, like, corporate committees that, like, plan out the film and, like insert filmmakers and editors and technicians into the holes.
Right. And, you know, I just think that just the way the filmmaking landscape is now, franchises are far too reliant on, like, familiar markers and signifiers and familiar things for a Star Wars movie to ever do something, like, radically new and different again. Like, Empire Strikes Back didn't do anything like the original Star Wars, and the idea of a sequel doing everything completely different from its predecessor is just something that I don't think we're going to see in a franchise.
The only things you can only see in a Mad Max film.
Yeah. As long as George Miller, God love him, keeps plugging away.
Yeah, and, like, well, actually, is George Miller actually going to make another Mad Max movie?
He keeps saying he has, like, 3 more scripts, so I don't know when they're going to get made, but
if they're going to get
made, at least we know the material's out there.
Yeah.
So
regardless,
we can look forward to that eagerly.
Good God, I'm kind of fascinated by Justice League, especially because I've been listening a lot to, like, Bob Chipman's new Giant, Really That Bad, on Batman v Superman, and it is, like, this sprawling epic of, like filmic theory, journalism, and criticism, all in, like, one giant package.
Oh, I watched all of Part 2 this morning. That is as long as some movies, and I gobble that shit up. But
oh yeah, it's great, and, like, so I'm thinking about, like, man, like, what is Justice League going to be like?
Let me tell you, since Batman v Superman, I have been adamant that I will not see Justice League, but reactions I have seen from a couple of critics, namely Darren Franich and another Entertainment Weekly writer named Dana Schwartz, their reactions alone, along with a glorious picture, which I don't think I sent you, but did you...
Oh, is it like the Henry Cavill's un-CGI'd mustache?
Yeah, it's the CGI mustache, like, CGI removed mustache. Oh my God. Just
that is like the most curious use of CGI I have ever seen.
that screenshot and the reactions of those two writers alone made me go, maybe I do want to see this movie.
It seems like the kind of train wreck that can only be created in the modern like blockbuster forge.
It's just so strange because like Batman v Superman was not an entertaining train wreck. That movie is appalling and a chore to watch. But
yeah.
I don't know, man. Maybe Justice League might be kind of fun to watch.
Hey man, like a half Joss Whedon train wreck. Those are words we've never said before.
No,
Whereas, like, boring Zack Snyder movie was something we had said before Batman v Superman.
I think you could perhaps call Age of Ultron a half Joss Whedon train wreck. Anyway,
we'll get back to
that. That's a different conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show. We're talking about some movies from the 1930s and 40s this week.
Yep.
Some more of that.
We're going backwards in time.
We're going way back. Some classical Hollywood era comedies this week, namely the Marx Brothers' Duck Soup and Ernst Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be. Not to spoil anything, but both of which I enjoyed quite a bit.
I enjoyed them quite a bit too.
Reed, which one did you watch this week?
Not Duck Soup.
Okay, that's fine. Hey, Duck Soup is very entertaining, but there's a bit more to chew on with To Be or Not to Be.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot more to talk about To Be or Not to Be,
But anyway, as always, before we get into that, let us pose that age-old question. What have we been watching? Yes, John, go ahead.
I forget.
Did you not write it down?
I don't think I've seen everything. Wait a minute. No, I watched some TV.
Okay.
I watched some, like, classic TV. I watched, for a film class, I watched the series Route 66, which is, like, a classic, like, 60s, like, travelogue where, like, two dudes, like, go across the country meeting people. Actually, it's not that bad.
For those listening to this, this is an audio-based medium. Reed is holding up a sign alternating bad and good based on what we're talking about. Because that's how he chooses to communicate.
Yeah, and it's like, there's not too much to say about Route 66 other than, like, it is, like, two generally charming actors getting into, like, really weird situations. Like, the first episode of this series features, like, these two dudes going to, like, some, like, rural bumfuck town run by, like, an overwhelming patriarch who, like, owns everything and keeps everyone in debt because, like, apparently he has, like, riled everyone into a frenzy by, like, killing a German soldier during World War II. And it is just really strange, especially considering, like, even though it's, like, it is the first episode, the show just kind of rolls in with, like, here's our two dudes, what the fuck is backstory? Which is, like, here they are, they're poor, but they have, like, some super expensive car, which they claim, like, one of them, like, fell onto some money as, like, an inheritance because all their because, like, their dad died, another which is, like, an old begotten beatnik. And, like, they just kind of go around, apparently they just kind of go around the country running into old begotten jazz musicians on their deathbeds.
Huh. Well, I have never heard of this.
You know what? There's, like, one, like, the instructor showed it to us because it is, like, somewhere between sort of, like, television's episodic nature and, like, cinematic form, because, like, there is a lot of, like, cinematic techniques into it. Like, there's a ton of, like, location shooting. The episode we watched happened to take place in Pittsburgh, and the opening of it is just them driving through the Fort Pitt Tunnel, and they're actually at the Fort Pitt Tunnel, and they're actually at Point State Park, and these locations.
Great place, 10 out of 10. Yes. Point State Park, great place, 10 out of 10.
Yeah,
would
10
frolic
out of 10.
through again.
Would frolic through again. And, like, you know, sometimes it does, it is interesting in that way. It's kind of, I suppose it's the, like, far tamer Manchurian Candidate of television insofar as, like, it's cinematic, it's, like, filmic form is concerned.
Mm.
Whereas like it's kind of like somewhere between like classic 60s television and like sometimes it's like super close-ups of people's faces and like lots of location shooting. So it was an interesting watch. I'm not sure like how much like what you guys would get out of it, but like I found it pretty entertaining for like classic 60s television.
All right. I mean, unless forced to see it, I probably will not see it, but sounds kind of interesting.
I didn't regret watching it.
That's good.
And like seeing like a town, like an American like rural town run by a single like overbearing patriarch is something I haven't seen in television before.
Well, there you go.
At least not in 60s television, but I think that's like the only thing I've seen in any sense of completion to be able to talk about.
All right.
Because like everything else, like I watched the beginning of like 2 fascinating feminist films for my documentary class, but I haven't finished them, so I don't really feel like I am able to talk about them at any great length.
All right.
But maybe I'll talk about them next week.
Oh, all right. I will eagerly
anticipate that. I've just been so fucked with work and filming and so on. So that is what I've been doing.
I almost had nothing to talk about this week. If we had recorded on Sunday, I probably would have almost nothing. But as it happens, I have quite a bit of something. But Reed, have you been watching anything of note?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. So we continue into the Geography 101 film series with a 2007 documentary by Aaron Wolf, Ian Chaney, and Kurt Ellis called King Corn. At first, I thought this is probably one of the dumbest things I've ever. This is probably one of the dumbest things because these 2 guys from Boston, they lived in Boston all their life, and they decided to go to the middle of bumfuck nowhere in Iowa, raise an acre of corn.
They just wake up one day and are like, all right, I think we should go to Iowa and just raise an acre of corn.
This sounds like when they taught us like in Russian class, like they were like those Slavophile intellectuals who went to like rural Russia and said like, man, I want to get back to like the rural part of like Russia. Let's get back to the earth. Then they spend like a week there, realize, holy fuck, this is terrible, and run right back home.
That's kind of what happens, except it's just drawn out in a span of 13 months. Or 14 or 15 months. So...
Well, I don't know how long the Russian Slavophile intellectuals stayed in the commune.
4 days, I think. I don't know. So anyways, they go back, raise an acre of corn, and their whole mission is to see where corn from Iowa ends up in the food supply. And this is like a research documentary.
Brick moment. There's a lot of ways you could do that doesn't involve going and buying an acre of corn.
Well, that's what makes this documentary corny. So.
Well, John, there's a lot of ways you could figure out the effect of a McDonald's diet on your health, other than just eating McDonald's for every meal for 30 days straight. But I'm damn glad Super Size Me exists.
Yeah, Tyler, you make a good point.
And mainly considering the points, basically corn is everywhere in the diet, going from animal feed, so basically what you eat. So like if you go to a McDonald's and you buy a quarter pounder, that burger is going to be from corn-fed cow, and it's actually going to be much different than from grass-fed cow.
Oh yeah, well that's like a big like environmental movement to like get back to like grass fed because like like corn fed just isn't sustainable.
No, it's not at all. It's not sustainable, and it turns out animals on a corn fed diet get fat and die much faster than on grass. So, I wonder why.
The Hack Fraud Show. Come here for your environmental agriculture concerns.
Stay tuned for the launch of our spin-off podcast, the Hack Fraud Agriculture Show. Or just corn, ! Which would fit much better with our brand. Sorry, go on, Reed.
That real quick. I'll be right back.
Where it shows where like each thumbnail is just the zoom up of like the gap between 2 corn kernels.
Good lord.
corn.
Or like, no, it's like an image of corn kernels, but like every individual kernel is one of our faces, just like repeated over and over again. Now, Tyler, this is the most surreal thing that's ever been on this show.
This is very strange. Do you have anything else to say about King Corn, Reed, before we spiral down a wormhole we can never pull ourselves out of?
It's charming and it's educational.
Well, how does it compare to Super Size Me, considering that we've already made the comparison?
Well, in Super Size Me, you don't get to learn how to make high fructose corn syrup in your kitchen. It turns out you need some enzymes and some sulfuric acid.
Both of which you can supply.
Well, you can also buy online, because capitalism. So
yeah,
hooray!
Yeah. And probably one of the last things is that the film ends with the farmer who the two guys rented an acre to grow their corn from. The farmer went out of business and then had to auction off his farm. So yeah,
great ending.
Great ending. Fantastic ending. King Corn.
So would you recommend it?
I don't want to get too corny, but it's full of some ears. Too many cobs. Tyler, what did you watch this week?
Moving on.
Well, good lord. These puns are the new Blue Dong jokes. Alright. So, this week, I watched a few things. Alright, so, just last night, I watched my first Jim Jarmusch movie.
Oh.
That would be 1987, I think? 1987's Down by Law. Starring Tom Waits, Roberto Benigni, and another guy whose name I can't remember. I think it's John Lories or something like that. Anyway, the film concerns these three gentlemen who all end up in the same prison cell in Louisiana and kind of hang out in the prison cell for a while, then decide to escape, and then basically trek through the bayou trying to find their way to freedom. So, Jim Jarmusch, I haven't seen any other of his movies, but I've heard a lot about him. He was kind of a big figure in the independent film scene in the 80s and 90s. His movies, I think, are generally just kind of noted for their, like, basically unconventional structures and, like, non-traditional dramatic structures, maybe sometimes non-dramatic structures. This movie was interesting. The first, like, 30 to 45 minutes, I thought were pretty boring. I don't know, it's just, you kind of start, like, following these two guys, Tom Waits and John Lories, like, kind of their separate threads that lead them to land in the same prison cell, and then Roberto Benigni kind of shows up once they're all in jail. Then they're in prison, and it's just kind of, I don't know, it's not super interesting to watch.
Like, meandering, or...
Very meandering, not a lot really happening, but... And then they kind of go through the bayou, and it gets a little bit better, still not super interesting, but I will say, this movie does build to a very charming and pretty entertaining finale. It's still kind of pretty low-key, and the movie, I gather, must have been pretty low budget. It's in black and white, although it is shot by Robbie Mueller, who did Paris, Texas, so the movie does look very good. I don't know, a lot of it, I thought it was, like, okay, but the ending of it, I did really enjoy. The last, like, 30 minutes or so, I did actually enjoy quite a bit.
Okay.
So, not completely worthless. But, certainly not my favorite thing that I've ever seen.
Okay.
I was going to watch Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight, but I got, like, 7 minutes in, and I didn't know the movie was in Shakespearean English, so...
Oh, yeah, like, every time, like, I've actually never seen Chimes of Midnight in full, because, like, every time I say, like, okay, I'm gonna try and get through this, and like I just get like 20 minutes in, and like my brain is out, it's like pouring out of my ear, and I just go like, no, and I'm sorry, Wells, all your magical cinematography can't save me.
and I like Shakespeare, but
Yeah.
watching it can be a real chore.
Well, like hearing it all in like just like brisk Wellesian pace is just overwhelming.
Yeah, it's very difficult to keep up with. Anyway, let's see. Also, the other night I ventured out to the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood to see on 70mm 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, interesting.
Now, we've thoroughly litigated this movie before, so we don't need to get too deep into this, but I certainly, I'm on the record as liking this movie more than you.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think everyone should see this movie on the big screen. I think this movie really demands to be seen on as large a screen as you can. It didn't really change my opinion on the movie. I still think it's a very beguiling, very strange, not super entertaining movie that I will probably continue to revisit in the future, just because I do think there is stuff to be mined there. But
it is one of like the film curiosities.
Yeah. But I just think there's something to be said, like seeing it in a theater, it really does envelop you, and you can, I think, more easily kind of allow yourself to get lost in it. So I think there's something to be said for that.
Okay then.
And seeing it on 70mm was a treat. I just felt like it was...
And I'm sure like seeing it in like an old movie palace can't hurt.
Oh, that was delightful. I hope to return to that place many times. In no small part because they take Movie Pass.
There we are.
Anyway, I've also continued watching Atlanta, which I now think you are really just going to have to watch.
Okay, so it is one of these.
This show, I haven't even finished the first season yet. I still have like 3 episodes left, but it is fascinating. I don't know how Donald Glover was allowed to make this. And apparently he pitched the show as like Twin Peaks with rap, which, as someone who has seen the first season of Twin Peaks, I can say is not an inaccurate description. It's so interesting. This show is very experimental. There's an episode where Justin Bieber is a character played by, and in the context of the show, is a black man. So, that's interesting. There's another episode that is focused on the main character's girlfriend, who in all the other episodes is kind of a minor character. She gets her own like spotlight episode, which is great. It's so interesting. There's the episode I just watched is a half-hour long. Like, they frame it as like a spoof BET version of like the Charlie Rose Show, where one of the characters goes on to like talk about like transgender rights, and there are commercial parodies that play throughout the episode, and it is one of the strangest half hours of television that I have ever seen, and I loved it.
This sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I need to see this.
It's fascinating, and like the first, I already told you about how like the second episode is just like a scathing indictment of the American prison system in less than 30 minutes. Yeah. And I just think this show, it's extraordinary, and I can't believe that this got made and got on the air. I can't.
What channel is it on?
It's on FX. Which I will say that actually I shouldn't I should be fair to FX. They do allow some this is the channel that broadcasts Fargo after all.
Yeah, and like what used to do It's Always Sunny, but
yeah, right. So yeah, Atlanta. I recommend everyone watch this show. Quite frankly, it's incredibly interesting. And
yeah, that sounds. I might watch that tonight.
Yeah, and I'm very eager. It's only 10 half-hour episodes, so it's very doable. And Donald Glover, I'm on board with whatever he chooses to do next, including, well, maybe not including playing Lando Calrissian in the Han Solo movie. But anyway, one last thing here, actually a couple. I have kind of been haltingly watching, like in kind of bits and bobs, although I've seen this movie before. Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse.
Oh, I've never actually seen that.
Do you know about this movie? This is
I know about the movie.
All right, this is the documentary chronicling the making of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. I think every aspiring filmmaker and film student should see it. It's really, really quite incredible. And what you see Francis Ford Coppola putting himself through in the making of this, and just kind of it is a glimpse into one man's madness, quite truly.
Well, I think like Apocalypse Now is like the only story of like filmmaker goes mad into his own head that actually went somewhat well.
Right. Well, in that
it is like an anomaly for that.
In that it produced a movie that is actually very good.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Like, it actually produced something watchable, because like all of these movies like tend to be just like these utterly, sometimes not even insane, just sometimes just like weird and unwatchable.
Yeah, and I think I need to watch Apocalypse Now again, because I'm not sure I fully.
I've seen it too.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully got it the first time I saw it, but certainly I don't remember loving it. But I mean, this documentary is just an incredible document of the filmmaking process. I remember loving
Portion.
Yeah.
Saw the director's cut, so take of this what you will. To me, like the moment they get to like the former French plantation, to me is like that's when like the movie grinds to a halt, and like I'm not as on board with old fat Marlon Brando as maybe the movie wants me to be.
Yeah. Well, you say you've only seen the director's cut?
I've only seen the director's cut.
Okay, well I've only seen the theatrical cut, so
okay. I've been told they're like paced differently, so I'm curious. Like, we just is that podcast material or
it could be, certainly. I'd be interested in revisiting it. We may look into that at some point. And then just something else that I've tried to watch this whole thing several times and never actually finished it, but I'm trying again, and hopefully this will be for real this time. Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War, which is just I've loved like every minute of that I have seen. I've just never actually finished it because it is quite the undertaking. But just an incredible document of a time and a place in history, and I think it's quite extraordinary. And I've heard his many of his other documentaries are incredible as well. He just had that one about Vietnam that just came out, which if I can find the time, I would definitely like to watch.
What? The only reason stopping me from enjoying Ken Burns is that, like, I'm a busy man.
Right. And his documentaries air on the side of, 15 hours.
Yeah.
But what can you do? Yeah. Anyway, that's what I have been watching. So let's get into these comedies that we're going to talk about.
So, something much lighter than Hearts of Darkness.
Oh, for sure. What do we want to talk about first?
Reed, I think that's up to you.
As always.
Let's talk about the movie that wasn't a musical.
Okay.
To be or not to be.
Not to be.
Yes. 1942. Okay. Ernst Lubitsch directed and co-written, starring Jack Benny and Carol Lombard and others. To be or not to be.
I'm going to tell like a little, I mean, it's to be or not to be. Let me just get up the cast in front of me real quick.
Okay.
No, I don't need the phrase. I want the movie. There we are. I have actually seen parts of this movie before. I just did not realize it when I was watching.
Oh.
I once, glanced upon the very ending of it when they have one of the actors dressed up as Hitler, and like they're like doing like the masquerades in the opera house and like escaping to Britain. The problem is that like I hadn't seen any of the movie before, so what was unfurling before me was a movie where Hitler parachutes into Scotland.
Right.
And because like it was like an old, I think it was like an old CRT monitor, I couldn't discover like what the movie was called or what it was. So like it was something that would every once in a while like pop into my head. It's like, what was that? But now I have discovered what it was. It was delightful Ernst Lubitsch film set in Warsaw, Poland.
Yes.
Poland.
Yes. So basically, this movie follows a troupe of actors in Warsaw as World War II is imminent. They are developing a play like criticizing the Nazis.
Yeah, it's literally called Gestapo.
Right. And anyway, there's a whole spiral of events that lead to these actors becoming embroiled in a spy plot.
Yeah, well, like there's like the Nazis invade. There's like this big like set piece where like they bomb Warsaw during like one of the performances.
Mm-hmm.
And then like there's this huge thing like everyone has to go to war, and then there's like this giant time lapse of like Colonel Erhard, who is, I suppose, the sort of lieutenant governor of Warsaw in this movie's universe.
They call him Concentration Camp Erhard. I don't know if you heard.
Concentration Camp Erhard, they say.
Yeah. So, this movie's great.
Yeah, this is... this movie has, like... This is such a quotable movie. It has such gems as Heil Myself.
Heil Myself!
Oh, Tara, he's doing the Shakespeare, what we're doing the Poland.
Oh my god.
Which for that, I just leapt back and said, oh, this movie's great. The beginning of this movie, where it's like there's like the faux, like at first, like we are presented like their Nazi play as if it is something that is like literally happening in Germany,
yes.
And then we like pull back, and there's like a bunch of like actors' quarrels where they say like, "Oh, we would have gotten a laugh from it by him saying Heil Myself."
Right.
We don't want to laugh. This is supposed to be an earnest document of Nazi Germany.
Right. Well, the movie starts with that like fake out sequence, and I'm like. Yeah. Is Hitler, like, going to be a character in this?
Oh, yeah, you see that? It's like, there's that fabulous, like, opening in Warsaw. Why is this car stopping?
But yes.
It was hilarious.
Yes, but very quickly you find out that is all a ruse. But the movie is nonetheless delightful. And Jack Benny is just wonderful in this movie. He is playing a very vain, conceited actor who, whenever, no matter who he's impersonating, in a little recurring bit that I love, always has to go, oh, have you heard of that great Polish actor, Joseph Tura?
Doing the Shakespeare, what we're doing the Poland.
Yes, and he is constantly either they haven't heard of him or don't like him at all.
Yeah, and that is utterly fabulous. And, like, there's, like, the great sequences where, like, their performances of Earhart are what Earhart turns out to be.
Yes! I love that. That's, like, you know, there's this old Looney Tunes bit where Bugs Bunny is impersonating a cop while he's, like, in a house with some gangsters, and he does this routine, and then the actual cops come and do the exact same routine. That's basically what happens in this movie.
Yeah. But only it's with fucking Nazis.
Right.
There is something to say about, like, this movie is, like, halfway between Night Train to Munich and those old Looney Tunes propaganda shorts.
Yes.
Like, its tone and theming. Because, like, it's partially, like, earnest, like, Polish resistance film drama, and then also just, like, farce with Nazis as, like, silly bad guys.
Yes. And it's interesting. At first, you're kind of like, oh, what is this movie going to do? But the Nazis are very clearly treated as villains, even if they are somewhat buffoonish.
Yeah, well, I'll get into what this movie has to say about Nazis a little bit.
Yeah, but I do think this movie, like, they have some, like, pretty interesting moments where they're like, I think, is it like the theater got blown up or something, and they're like, oh, the Polish resistance, they're still going strong.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
things
I
like
think, no, it was the train station that got blown up.
oh right, yes, the train station. Yeah, they're like, oh, look at that, and there's little good, nice little moments like that show you like Ernst Lubitsch understands what, at least to some extent, what the people of Europe are going through.
Yeah, and like there's like the moment where like people are throwing rocks at copies of Mein Kampf in like a little montage, and like giant model trains are blowing up, and like it's like there's the Polish resistance. Da, 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like why we fight in those little moments.
Yeah, and yet this movie is hilarious.
Oh yeah, it is. It is like a riot from beginning to end.
This is like if Night Train to Munich just leaned a little bit harder into the absurdity of the situation it presents.
Yeah, I just adore the ending where it's like a man dressed as Hitler parachutes into Scotland, and the farmers look at him and say, "First Hess, now this."
Yeah, I just love it, and such a daring and like fascinating movie to make at this time. I think,
but it's also a movie that could have only been made in 1942.
Certainly, I think much like The Great Dictator, I think this is the kind of movie you could never make about World War II nowadays. Although I say that in a world where Inglourious Basterds exists, so perhaps I'm wrong. But
Yeah. Well, Inglourious Basterds opened a bunch of cans of worms all its own.
True. But I do love that movie.
I do too.
Dr. Reed, what have you to say about To Be or Not to Be?
Yes. Probably my favorite feature of this movie was the Jack Benny character, mainly because he goes from playing this buffoonish colonel and then picking up on everything Seletsky does, and then is able to emulate Seletsky as well. And then as he faces probably the hardest acting position of his career and of his life, playing the part to help Poland, he walks into the room and then finds none other than the colonel, who he already played before to a T.
I love that whole sequence where he's going from impersonating Colonel Ehrlich to impersonating Seletsky meeting Colonel Ehrlich to being in the room with Seletsky's corpse. It's just incredible.
There was a fascinating idea of like wartime survival skills played as farcical performance.
Yeah.
That is just utterly fascinating and hilarious.
That sequence where like they're accusing him of being an imposter and then they rip off the corpse's beard is one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen in a comedy.
And like all of the reactions from all those actors is brilliant. Is like Earhart goes, "Shoots!
Shoots!" Oh, what a delight!
And the idea of like Earhart as like a buffoonish villain is hilarious.
Yeah.
But do we want to talk about the elephant in the room?
I think we'd better.
Okay, because like this was something I brought up. Like this was not really something I thought about while like watching it, but like the moment like I finished it and I was ruminating over it, it is something that's like hard to like shake off. Is that like this is a movie set in 1942 in Warsaw, in Nazi occupation, that never really mentions the Holocaust. Like, the evils of the Nazi regime are mostly in things like political dissent and, like, execution, like, political executions. There is no... I don't even think they say the word Jew a single time.
Well, it's interesting because there is one character who is very obviously Jewish. Like, his name is Greenberg, and he is constantly spouting that, like, speech from The Merchant of Venice, which I think is about Jewish people. Where it's like, if you stab us, do we not bleed?
All that glistens is not gold. I think so.
Yeah. He kind of gets a big moment at the end. But yes, other than that, like, the Holocaust is not so much as even implied, really.
Yeah, and is that, like, I brought this up in the group chat, but like, now that Reed's up to speed, I'm curious, like, is that a valid criticism at this point?
You know what? Because I was thinking about Night Train to Munich, and even that film had concentration camp mentioning.
Yeah, well, you literally go to a concentration camp in Night Train to Munich. They name drop the fact that, like, hey, the Nazis are anti-Semitic guys. And, like, and even, like, the great dictator that came out 2 years earlier and is far more farcical than this.
Oh, yeah.
He's really upfront and not coy at all about, like, hey, Hitler's targeting Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tricky because, I mean, certainly, I don't know. Certainly if you were to, like, portray the Nazis as buffoonish villains now, I think that would be problematic.
Yeah.
At the time, it's tough, but I don't.
That's it, but, like, I thought about, like, the at the time thing, but the issue is, like, we knew about, like, the Holocaust at this point. This was not. This was like, that's like a national myth. We say that, like, we didn't learn about it until, like, the soldiers stumbled upon the camps. Like, we knew about this. We knew about this even before, like, Auschwitz opened. That, like, there were, like, mass executions in Poland and, like, atrocities like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case of not knowing.
Also, mass executions in former states where Nazis went in and destroyed the state.
Oh yeah, well that's just the general, like, all these things happened in, like, the aftermath of destroying the state, but that's like entire, like, Timothy Snyder-esque, like, lectures we can have later.
Yeah.
But this was a case where it's like, unless they are just really ignorant, they knew about it and chose not to portray it. And I guess, like, my question is, like, why did they do that?
Well,
let me.
And, like, and I'm making that sound, like, far more accusatory than I think it is, because, like, that's not to say that, like, every single, like, World War II movie needs to, like, directly reckon with the Holocaust. Just, like, the big elephant in the room.
I was about to say, like, I don't want to say it's every filmmaker's responsibility to directly address that stuff. I mean, certainly when you're making a movie about Nazis, maybe you should address that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think it hurts the movie. Because the movie,
far as, like, a piece of entertainment, no. Like, I never, like, in the middle of watching it, I never thought to myself, wait a minute, I didn't see Auschwitz, or wait a minute, where's the Jewish characters? I didn't think that.
Right. I mean, I don't know that I
genuinely don't have answers for these.
I don't know that I
it's
have
a little shaky, but so I can allude with some history help. So 1942, by the end of it, every single Allied nation knew that, the Holocaust was happening, for sure, definitely.
Yeah. It's not a question, like, whether we knew, it was a question of why isn't it here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as, like, well, part of, like, my thing was pretty cynical insofar as that, like, there was still Nazi sympathizers in America, and, like, granted, like, we were technically at war with Germany. That, like, this was still, like, early in the American war effort.
Can I just say, I don't think Ernst Lubitsch was tailoring his movie to appease Nazi sympathizers.
No, I am not blaming him of that.
I don't know whether I don't think the studio was really doing that either, because I've read about Hollywood, in World War II, and I certainly, based on, like, the propaganda stuff that they were putting out at this point, I don't think they were at all concerned about holding on to the Nazi sympathizer audience.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of thing. But that is just something that's in my mind, because, like, I'm thinking a lot about, like, the Jewish refugees we turned away nowadays.
Yeah.
But, like,
I mean, these are big questions that I am hesitant to pin on this film, and I think that certainly if they did address it, well, I don't want to say if they did address it, it would be harder to make it a comedy, because The Great Dictator does at least mention it.
Yeah, that is it is really difficult to make a comedy about the Nazis without directly, like, addressing, like, the Holocaust. And, like, I mean, what like Inglourious Basterds does is it makes, like, a farcical, like, revenge film out of it.
Right.
That's,
I mean, the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds is a Jewish family being brutally killed.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. And,
like,
which in some ways that movie is allowed to have its cake and eat it too, not unlike Schindler's List, but I digress.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I think I am on the record as really enjoying like World War II era Looney Tunes propaganda cartoons.
Yeah, there's
Certainly
I enjoy some of it too. Like
so to be clear, I'm not endorsing the Japanese ones because those ones are very hard to watch. But the ones making
those are utterly horrifying.
The ones making fun of the Nazis, I enjoy those quite a bit, and certainly
Der Fuhrer's face is a great Donald Duck cartoon. Russian Rhapsody is great.
Russian Rhapsody is one of my favorite things, and I don't know. I think getting I think this is a discussion worth having, but I also think it's worth pointing out that we can't change this movie. It exists as it does.
No. This was just something like, we cannot really talk about like a World War II movie without really discussing this. That is just like the big, that's what like Lindsay Ellis discussed in her like big like Mel Brooks piece, is that like, we now know like the World War II movie has changed when you know what they're going to find on the other side of those woods. Yeah. And like with our hindsight, especially like especially the political climate that has made us ultra sensitive to these things, we cannot help but at least bring it up.
Yeah. I said, let's watch some comedies this week. It'll be lighter.
I'm a student of authoritarianism.
I'm not blaming. This is a completely valid discussion to have. But the bottom line is, I just have no answers. And
this is why I'm asking the question, so like I can absolve myself of like the responsibility to answer any of them. That is the authority of the question giver.
Yeah, but I think regardless of this is a very delightful, extremely well-made movie that I would recommend everybody watch.
Oh yeah, none of this changes the fact that this is still delightful. This is still like a bunch of filmmakers and actors at the top of their game.
Yeah. And
I'm now very curious to see more Ernst Lubitsch work.
Oh yes. And I would just like to say, Carol Lombard, I think, died before this movie was released. She died in a plane crash. And what a loss to Hollywood that we never got to see more of her work, because she seems to be an extremely versatile and well-matched actress, an extremely versatile actress, well-matched as a sparring partner with anyone who she goes up against in this movie.
Yeah, she's one of the great gems of the movie.
Any closing thoughts, Dr. Reed?
This was a favorite. Yes.
Okay. That's good.
That's good.
Even though it might not be the absolute favorite, but it's still a favorite.
I think before we do our year 2 movie rankings, you should watch The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp.
Yeah, go watch any like Powell and Pressburger movie we have either like assigned for the podcast or just talked about in brief.
I still haven't watched A Matter of Life and Death, and I need to do that as soon as possible.
Man. You need to see that.
I desperately want to. But anyway, let's move on to 1933's Duck Soup.
Which begins with a literal duck soup.
Oh yes. Although that does not come into play at any time during the rest of the movie.
No, I don't know why it's called duck soup.
Couldn't tell you.
No. But regardless, duck soup is about
so
I see I watched the right movie this week for once.
Well,
no, I don't mean that as a pejorative.
Yes, this movie stars the at the time 4 Marx Brothers, Groucho, Chico, Harpo, and Zeppo, who does basically nothing in the movie, but hey, good for him. Basically, Groucho Marx plays Rufus T. Firefly, the newly appointed, is it like Chancellor, or
I think,
or do they just call him the leader? I think they just call him the leader.
I think they just call him leader. He is like the sort of like appointed by the rich populist leader of Fredonia, a false little country which is just full of like mishmashed imperial uniforms.
Yes. Basically, the plot of this movie is just rocketing from one comic set piece to the next.
The density and speed of the jokes in this movie is insane.
It's ridiculous. I mean,
it is insane.
This movie was made in 1933. I mean, like, Chaplin was still making silent films at this point.
Yeah.
Silent films were still very much a going concern. But this movie feels like the best of both worlds between, like, a silent film, a vaudeville act, and an exquisitely written, like, screen comedy.
Yeah, it is like a live-action version of, like, the Golden Age of Looney Tunes.
Yeah,
In,
pretty
like,
much.
in, like, all the best ways. It is, like, there are just, like, I cannot, like, exaggerate this enough, that it is just, like, it just peppers you with visual gags, written jokes, like,
I would frequently...
audio gags. Lots and lots of audio
Lots
gags.
of sound gags in this movie.
Yeah.
And I had to rewind this thing more than a couple times to re-hear a Groucho Marx line to make sure I'd caught the joke.
Yeah, because they're just like, oh my... And everyone is speaking just, like, really fast. It is, like, hyper... It is the kind of, like... We honestly don't have the speed of comedy anymore.
Well, this movie is only 70 minutes long.
Yeah, and you just get the idea that, like, this is something that, like, they had just, like, a shit ton. They just gave it to the editor, and he just, like, chopped it to the bone and just cut away anything that was unnecessary or fatty about it.
Yeah. Everything in this movie, like, I think this is true of, like, the best comedic work. Like, everything in this movie is either a setup for a joke or a payoff to a joke.
Yeah, there was no, like, in-betweens. There was no time for... They don't even give you time to laugh.
They really don't.
They don't give you time. There's no, like, pause for anything. It is just... There was something very filmic about this kind of comedy in, like, a way that, like, I'm not too sure 1933 was ready for.
Yeah. I mean, this movie was not a hit upon its release, and
No.
I think that just speaks to the genius of the Marx Brothers, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you compare this to Chaplin or even like Keaton, this is almost experimental.
Yeah.
And just like the aspect of, like, here we are in this grandiose, like, world where, like, somebody's appointed leader.
Well, the scale of this movie is incredible. Like, the sets and the amount of extras, like the giant chorus bellowing, "Hail, hail, Fredonia!"
Yeah. This must have been expensive to make.
I love it. And this movie ends with a gigantic, like, war sequence.
Yeah,
that
which
just
is just like...
that just zooms from one gag to another without even worrying about connecting them. Like, they'll just cut to an establishing shot and immediately cut to the next scene.
He just does not relent. Like, it is... Any sense of, like, 3-act structure is just thrown out the window. It is just like a continuous vaudeville act.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if this, like, drew elements from the Marx Brothers vaudeville act, and yet it feels completely cinematic, I would say.
Oh yeah, like, there was, like, exactly, it is just so, like, quick and chopped to the bone. There was no, like, vaudeville sort of, like, nittery about it, which is something, like, the thing about theatrical performances, there's lots of pausing, there's lots of, like, waiting, and sort of, like, there was, like, something, like, rigorously, like, methodical and timed about theatrical performances, whereas this has none of that.
Right.
This is just, like, joke, it ends.
Yeah.
And it's kind of flooring.
It's wildly entertaining.
Yeah, I was kind of amazed by it.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything else quite like this. Nothing that fuses, like, the many forms of comedy at this time so perfectly.
Like there's a gag where it's like, and I can't, like, in a 1933 film where it's like there was, like, this wild chase where, like, he's given a safe code. And he goes up, and he goes to this giant thing that looks like a safe, and he starts turning it, and it becomes a radio.
Yeah.
And then like immediately they go into, what's that? Oh, mice. Mice don't play music. No, maestro.
You're right. Oh, the puns in this movie are Reed level at times.
Oh yeah, they are, but they're so quick. You cannot react to them quick enough.
I just love it.
Isn't that sort of like a defeating comedy though?
Well, but it's all about mixing the forms of comedy, because you also have that in there with great wordplay based jokes like
double entendre.
Like
they do
when
every single thing you can of the English language in this.
Like when the rich lady says to Groucho Marx, "I hope you will follow in my husband's footsteps," and he says, "My first day on the job, and she's already making advances on me."
as he looks into the camera.
Right. I just really enjoyed this movie, and
it's incredible.
I think I'm going to have to seek out many more Marx Brothers films.
Yeah, this was a fucking ride.
What a ride.
Yeah.
And if any of the rest of them are as off to the races as this one is.
Anyone building a coherent career out of just like stuff as insane as this. Like if that's the case, man.
Applause. Just the smattering of quotes I have heard from some of their other movies suggests that everything might be on this level. Like, for example, this morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I'll never know. So, that is...
Got my trunks.
What'd you say?
Got my trunks.
Yes, exactly. So, that is Duck Soup.
God, we love it.
Yeah, it's great. I can see why this is at the top of everyone's lists. But, what shall we do next time?
Shit, it's too late for me to come up with ideas.
Well, just looking ahead, and this isn't something we have to do immediately by any means, but looking ahead, I know we had talked about doing a Rian Johnson episode at some point. And,
do we want to save that for, like, when Star Wars is
I think we can save that. Although we had also talked about, I don't know if we still want to do this, but we talked about, like, maybe revisiting a couple of the Star Wars movies at some point. I don't know if we need to do that.
That's something I'm interested in, because, like, it is just, because, like, I don't think, because, like, my exposure to Star Wars through pop culture is endless, but my exposure to the films themselves is shockingly small.
Yeah.
I think that's an experience I do have to go through.
I will always welcome the opportunity to rewatch The Empire Strikes Back. And if nothing else, I think looking at Force Awakens again here 2 years later...
I think there is a lot to re-examine there. It might turn into, like, our version of the Vidiots Into Darkness review, but I think there is something to re-analyze.
Well, here's the thing. The Vidiots Into Darkness review is an incredible hour and 45 minutes of content that I honestly think every film student should listen to that. Like, it is an incredible exercise in deconstructing a movie that doesn't work and figuring out why it doesn't work. So that's just something to look ahead towards. Obviously, we don't have to do that right now. So what do we want to do right now?
Shit. Is there anything else, like, on the, like, I know we have, like, a proverbial list somewhere, but I'm just merely not the keeper of it.
I always keep a running list. We had floated the possibility of doing some more Powell and Pressburger. There's still that, like, political double feature that I thought about doing, which would be...
what would that consist of?
Wag the Dog, and maybe Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd. Maybe we should save that, because I'm taking an Elia Kazan class next semester.
Okay, yeah, that'd be a good
We
idea.
still haven't done... There's a couple of Ang Lee movies I might want to watch.
Okay.
I still haven't seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Never mind.
We never did that Buster Keaton episode either.
Ooh.
Granted,
we did also say last week, maybe we should do something newer.
I'm not against it. We've just been watching a lot of really old movies lately.
I will say this, like, if you want a good time, set any, like, Wes Anderson soundtrack to The General, and you will just be in a riotous mood.
I may do that soon, because my roommates and I watched the Every Frame a Painting about Buster Keaton, and they were all very interested.
Yeah, like, Buster Keaton is, like, he is, like, one of the... I think, like, as far as, like, pure silent comedy is concerned, he is the king.
Yeah. Yes, I forgot. When I brought up the possibility of doing a Western episode, it completely slipped my mind, because I keep forgetting that I need to watch this movie. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a movie that I still somehow have not seen.
Okay.
But if there's any other
I
suggestions,
have like a crazy idea where it's like we could do like another like insane mashup.
all right.
We could do because neither of us have seen Crouching Tiger. What's it called again?
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Hidden Dragon. We could pair that up with like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as like a catch-up episode.
I'm not against that.
Because like we have been granted the opportunity here, just like to do whatever the fuck we want because we're not in any like themed like week or like episodes at the moment.
Yeah.
And like I feel the need to take advantage of that.
Reed, do you have any objections
or suggestions?
No.
All right. Well, another bizarre mashup it is, I guess. Then but these are always fun. So.
Oh yeah, because especially considering like it's always kind of fun to try and see what parallels we can make between the two.
Yeah. So Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Reed, were you around for Powell and Pressburger Week?
He was not. He was not on that episode.
Ooh, we need to change this. It is a matter of life and death.
We may need to look into more of that soon. I've heard. I mean, all of their work that I've seen so far. I mean, I didn't love Black Narcissus, but that movie, just as a visual creation, was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever
Black
seen.
Narcissus as like an experiment is utterly fascinating.
Yeah. So there is nothing I have seen or heard that would discourage me from seeing any of their movies.
Yeah, and I think like I think it's 49th Parallel is the most fascinating World War II movie I think I've ever seen.
Oh, that's interesting. I still need to see that too. 49th Parallel, yeah.
I think it's I might be getting my 40s wrong.
No, it's 49th Parallel. I'm very sure of this.
Yeah, that is one of the most fascinating like World War II World War II era movies, not like World War II movies in general.
They made another World War II movie too called A Canterbury Tale, which I've also heard is extraordinary. So we're gonna need to look into more of this at some point.
Yeah, this might maybe it'll be the week after.
Oh, perhaps. Well, we will look into that. Maybe I'll finally watch A Matter of Life and Death over Thanksgiving break.
See what you can. I'll be able to watch barely anything because I've just been fucked with homework over Thanksgiving break out of all things.
Oh, joy.
I have 3 fucking 8-page term papers due next week.
Jesus. Well, good luck with that. And, well, everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for indulging us.
Oh wait, we're still recording.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
What's my film? Shit, are we actually recording?
Well, I am recording now, but I could easily slice this stuff out. I want to keep the stuff about some of that Star Wars discussion. I would like. I'm
just curious. I don't think anyone wants to hear about my personal film projects.
Go start again.
So for continuity's sake, fuck.